it water with the sheep in the box?
Hello again, everyone. I know you didn't expect another one of these for quite a while, and usually I do try not to do two in a row like this, but, this series does basically just exist for me to get out my thoughts on certain issues that are either trending or something I've been thinking about for a while, and 2021 is continuing to be quite the trip, so it seems like the minimum wage is the main topic of discussion today, or at least the time of recording, and I've seen a lot of people argue back and forth, usually just with equally dumb takes, so I guess I just put my 2 cents out there. Now first, I guess we need to ask the question, how much should minimum wage be? Because that seems to be the main point of contention here. And not to be too much of a cop-out, but my answer is quite simple, really. The minimum wage should always be enough to allow someone to live a decent, comfortable life. In the UK, this is not actually officially a thing, but it is something that's measured, and is something that unions, for example, do push for. It's called the real living wage, and is calculated based on a number of factors, but essentially it calculates the cost of living for the average person based on groceries, bills, rent, and so on and so forth, with an extra weighting for London because living in London is unbelievably expensive, and then works out how much the minimum wage should be based on a full-time employment. And as a result, you can see just how many people are not being paid a decent amount. Now, to be fair, in the UK, the minimum wage, which for us is actually a relatively recent introduction, appears to be better implemented than it is in the US, at least from what I've seen, because our minimum wage, low as it may be, and inadequate though it may be a lot of the time, does increase with inflation and so on and so forth. And I guess that's the main point here. That is actually kind of horrifying to me to imagine that in America, the minimum wage just stays static until it's manually increased. Like, that's a huge amount of time and effort that activists are just wasting, essentially, because if, I don't know, Congress or whatever passed a law stating that the minimum wage has to stay in line with inflation or above, there wouldn't have to be this constant battle for minimum wage increase. But I guess let's talk about the drama or the tea or whatever. So essentially, Brianna Joy Gray, who was a big proponent of the increase of the American minimum wage to $15 when she was working for Bernie Sanders' campaign, turned around and said that actually it should be $25 after Biden said he would increase it to $15, which then caused a lot of other parts of the left to insist that $25 was too much and that some lefties will just never be happy. And I guess it's that I want to talk about, because it seems just kind of, very confusing to me as a leftist that other leftists would have these opinions. So I guess let's go over it. I'm not ragging on anyone, by the way. I don't particularly like Vaush, but I also don't hate him. His content just isn't for me, and I think he's a bit of a dickhead, which I'm sure he'd probably agree with, to be honest. And likewise, I don't really know anything about Brianna Joy Gray other than the fact that she occasionally comes out with some lefty tweets that I see on my timeline, so I don't really have any personal stake in this. I'm not even American, for fuck's sake, but I thought I'd explain my perspective on this minimum wage conversation and the role of the left in this discussion. So I guess the first thing to point out is that the fight for $15 actually started in 2012, and the current administration have said that they won't introduce it until 2025. That's 13 years, by the way, and don't get me wrong, from doing some conversions, $15 seems like a reasonable amount, although obviously I don't really know about cost of living in America or anything like that, so for the moment I'm going to assume that $15 is fine, acceptable, whatever. I guess the question is, will it still be 13 years from now? Because if that's how long it took to get $15, and it takes 13 or more years to implement any kind of increases, that means that we'll have 13 years at a $15 minimum wage, and we have to ask if that's acceptable. For me, I think it's probably prudent to push for the next increase as quickly as possible. Even, yes, it may seem ridiculous, but even before the current increase is implemented. Because if you only start to push for it, say, 5 years after this is implemented, that's 18 years. And I guess this is one of the things that sort of bothered me, because people were going on about Brianna Joy Gray and other people who were agreeing with her moving the goalposts and not being satisfied. And I guess I'm just confused, because that's sort of the point of a progressive movement, to not be satisfied. Moving goalposts is good. Yes, it's good to demand more and more rights, and yes, maybe to be ungrateful or to be, a bit of a shithead. But quite frankly, rights are often fought for in stages, and they never stop getting fought for. The workers' rights movement didn't stop when the 8-hour day was ratified, right? Because we wanted more than that. Likewise, when it comes to the minimum wage, obviously what we want is socialism, but that's probably unlikely to happen under neoliberal capitalism. So really the goal of socialists at the moment should be to push for better and better conditions and more power being transferred from the rich to the poor. We should advocate for as high a minimum wage as we can, and demanding more and more from our elected representatives is sort of the point of progressivism. We want constant progress, which means that honestly what we have right now should never be enough. We should be militant, angry little bastards in the eyes of the powers that be. We should be constantly demanding more and better. And yes, it's very nice that finally the $15 minimum wage has been passed in the US. I'm happy about that, and I'm sure a lot of people will as well. When technically it's not been passed, but it will be. But it's only now, and it's not enough to just say, okay, well, that's fine then. You know, like, this fight will have to happen again in the future, because the minimum wage isn't tied to inflation or cost of living increases. So somewhere like the US, the minimum wage will constantly be a thing that leftists get up in arms over every decade or so. You know, small victories are great, but we shouldn't be satisfied with them. We shouldn't stop there, you know? And stuff like this is just unhelpful and incredibly dumb. Like, deliberately taking ideas like changing the $25 increase and making it $50 is just dumb. It's bad faith and weirdly reminiscent of attack helicopter jokes, like, oh, you want to be something I don't approve of? Well, you may as well be something dumb. Same with gay marriage, apparently leading people to marry dogs and shit. It's just a weird straw man, and I don't know, like, you're arguing for one thing. Well, what if you're arguing for a completely different, ridiculous thing? Like, there are places in the world where the minimum wage isn't actually that far off $25 right now. In fact, this is something that we leftists have been using as an argument for quite a while, because when people say, the prices of goods will skyrocket, we obviously respond with, well, what about places like Norway, for example, where the minimum wage is around $20-ish, $22 in some places, and Big Macs or whatever haven't really gone up in price in those places. So it's just weird to me that we seem to understand that a $25 minimum wage, or at least something close to it, is possible in certain circumstances, but we just sort of don't want to talk about that, or we'll ignore that when we disagree. I don't know, it just seems very strange to me. Likewise, the hand-wringing over the economy or scaremongering about jobs being lost is an explicitly liberal take, and is really no different to the people doing the same shit over the $15, or people doing the same shit over the idea of a minimum wage in the first place. I'm no economist, and I don't have any kind of formal training or expertise with regards to, well, the economy, but I am aware that these are the exact same arguments that have been used to cull workers' rights and especially minimum wage increases for decades. You know, with the $15 minimum wage, it's just a stereotype at this point that a conservative will point to it and say, well, you'll just be automated out of a job if they have to pay you $15 an hour. Like, these things are already happening. They're already issues that need to be dealt with, and whether workers are being paid $5 or $25, at some point or another, they are going to be automated out of a job, because ultimately wages are an expense that a lot of businesses simply don't want to have to deal with. Machines will always be cheaper than people. These are issues we're going to have to deal with whatever happens. So rather than scaremongering about crashing the economy if you increase the minimum wage to $50, even though no one was suggesting that, we need to look into ways to mitigate the fallout of these things and at the same time improve conditions for workers. You know, like push for, say, a $25 minimum wage and also UBI, for example. And again, I don't really want to make this a whole drama thing with Vaush. I just think he posted cringe on twitter.com, and I just sort of wanted to set the record straight and of course put out my opinion on the minimum wage issue. Thanks for listening anyway.